Okay, so you might remember us from the first day. We are John and Paul, and we opened the Lean Coffee, which you kind of liked. We would like to. So, if you remember the last year's panel discussion, there was this awkward moment where we came into a discussion why only less trainers have to be on the stage, and then everybody basically ran to the stage, and it was a little chaotic but funny. So today we would like to present a new LeSS guide, which is called a panel self-design event. Basically, I think it's self-explanatory how it will work, but John, my colleague, will explain you the rules that we have created for you.
So thanks, Paul. So in a moment, we're going to do the panel self-design. And what we're basically going to do is going to ask you to represent one of the roles that we put on the stage. Go sit there and join the panel. It doesn't mean you need to stay there. If you want to leave, you just leave and someone else can take your seat. It doesn't mean that you need to be one of those roles. In real life, you can also take the position if you would like to. So we're going to open it up in a moment, and
Yeah, and the roles are business representative. That's somebody with a business role, a business mind. Less a trainer. I think that's self-explanatory. Less journeyer. Somebody is on the journey of less adoption, but not a trainer. Engineering role, engineering mindset. A different perspective. Whatever that might be, you are welcome to join this role. And you might also not have a different perspective per se, but maybe you would like to exercise a different point of view. That's a chair where you might actually start to propose something radically different. And a wild card. Maybe not every role or position is presented, so that's basically a chair for anyone who doesn't feel fitting in the other chairs.
The only rule for the wildcard is you have to explain why are you sitting on the wildcard chair.
And who you are, from which role hat you're speaking, right?
Yeah. So that being said, I will explain in a minute how we are actually going to have the questions. But basically, the floor is yours to join one of the chairs. And I will make it a little bit more COVID-proof. You can join, yeah. So George is the first one.
It's okay.
So panel with one person is not really a panel, so...
So do we...
The questions, okay, so I will explain how the question will work. You're going to ask the questions, and you're going to vote on your phones by moving to slido.com with this number. So the questions are from the audience. And whichever question or statement, you can make a statement as well that you would like to have discussed. And you vote for the actual question. So it's up to you. We're not going to ask you some strange question. It's quite transparent. So that's how we will do it. So just take your boundary away of moving to the stage.
And you can also use an old tradition of just using a standing microphone in the middle of a room. So you have two ways to post a question. First, open up that application, slido.com, with the code, QR code, or you can still use the old good microphone.
Considering the previous discussions,
all right,
and the
yeah.
system model that Victor did, we have one woman. That's great.
All right, the team has formed. You are free to jump off and on, hop off the stage anytime. You don't have to sit here for the entire hour. We like to have some fluidity going, right? And we have already the question which has 5 votes. We might have a chair called bus chair.
You already have one?
All right, good.
So we had the rule, if you're going on the wildcard, you need to explain why you're on the wildcard chair.
And
so I'm on the wildcard because I didn't read the Scrum guide, and someone said today that it was a bit strange, so I took the wildcard chair.
That's
It was, at least it was me. Maybe there are others, but
All
it was
right.
at least me.
okay.
All right, so please post your questions. Do you have the option to post a question? Do you see a way to do it in the app? All right, so these are the questions that have been posted by anonymous people. And the upvoted one is this one, a panel attention. How do you know you're going in the right direction with a LeSS adoption?
How long do we need to sit in this chair?
As long as you like.
Let me phrase it positively. How can new people come here?
You stand up and somebody sees an empty chair and jumps on the chair.
And if,
Okay.
and if
So
you
then
would
I-
like to join, you just come and stand on one of the sides, and after the question, we just...
Or kick somebody off the stage and take a chair. I don't know. Let's see how this works, Bas. I don't know. It's an experiment.
So then I would propose, like Mark said, let me emphasize that. Anyone who wants to sit in a chair, just make it also visible for us here in the chairs so that we can leave. Do we want to just let somebody stand there and then we decide who will leave based on what role we want to give them?
Aren't we over defining the process before we actually do the first try, or? Yeah, good. You're exercising that. How about you guys focus on the first question, which is how do you know you're going in the right direction with the LeSS adoption? Thank you, Bas, for a different perspective on that.
Please state which perspective you have, please, before you answer, Jesse.
Yeah. So from an engineering perspective, I think there's 2 points to this. So when are you ready for a LeSS adoption is an interesting one from the technical side, I think. And I think there needs to be kind of a safety net and a kind of a readiness for people to actually go outside of their original functional or component expertise. And they will likely need quite a bit of test automation that is done still before you do that. If you don't do that, and if you skip that step, then that might be a world of pain, because you might get a lot more build failures that cause your cycle time to go up rather than down. You might get a lot more hesitance to actually work on features, and you get stuck just reading code ad infinitum rather than just delivering it. So if your cycle time is going up, you get more commits to the main line per day from people, and a lot of these commits actually make it through to a green build, and you can deliver that. All of those things are improving, then you're probably going in the right direction. Otherwise, there is something either you should definitely take a close look at, or maybe you should just postpone the entire LeSS adoption, because you could do a lot of damage if you don't.
Yeah, so that's a great point on technical excellence. On top of that, I would say that like what we are reflecting on is, our teams taking more responsibilities? So actually, do they make decisions? Do they feel like being more empowered to improve things? For example, through overall retro or like team retros, that's a good indicator. And I think the other important one is to reflect on, because on this journey you try so many new things and like adopt new practices, to reflect on, are we actually making things simpler? Are we reducing dependencies? Because one of big risks, when you see some results, you can start making things more complicated, and it's organization growing, dependencies start growing again. So reflecting on, are we making things simpler and reducing dependencies, while scaling is an important one for us.
So for this question, I also would like to hear the business point of view. So Nadine, I think you're on the business chair.
Do you want to comment on a business point of view?
Could you give the mic to the business point of view, Nadine?
Yeah, thank you. How do you notice? Well, from my point of view, I think things are only really changing when a client knows or experiences anything out of it. Otherwise, it's just internal stuff, guys. No, just kidding, sorry. You were asking for it, right? So, no, but in general, from the experience that I've had myself, I would say that it's felt positive when at least stakeholders come to visit and they feel the buzz coming out of the teams. So you sort of get some sort of energy into the I don't know, group, experiments, setup, whatever. And what I also saw is that everybody was participating. I think that was a big change. So in the beginning you saw people a bit standing backwards, and as soon as I saw different people stepping in all the time, also when we did the marketplaces, that really brought in a lot of, well, you also know, brought in a lot of energy. Nevertheless, at the end, it's really about, are we able to deliver faster and better value?
Okay, thank you. So let's take the final.
Yeah, and I think not just maybe faster deliver, but more flexible, because that's the whole point. So that, for example, maybe the customers, they are used to a very difficult change management process, and now they can just drop in small features, and 2 weeks later they are done, and they have them on their table. And this is something so that the clients are basically seeing this, and they can experience this, and they say, wow, this is going to work. And if they get this positive momentum, and basically this means that we can more often work on the highest value, and this is basically what we then want to achieve. And I think another point is, which is the internal point, which the customers might not see directly, is how well can the organization learn? Is the amount of learning, the speed of learning increasing? Do they have the capabilities to learn as an organization? I think that is the points maybe I would put to this topic.
Nadine, would you give like final reply, because I sense that you would like to answer, Nadine? No? Okay.
Yeah, so as a wildcard person, I will say just the same. I think for me it's about the learning and the autonomy in learning. So when you start to get people in a team that says, oh, we never did that, cool, let's do it. And that's, for me, that's where you go in the right direction.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So while you are figuring out how the chair situation is going to work, I would like to ask to upvote the questions, because we have 2 questions with the same vote and our algorithm fails. Okay, now it doesn't fail anymore. Any more votes to cast? All right. The second less structure rule says that each team is co-located in the same room. What does it mean in times of COVID? Are there no less adoptions at the moment? Question mark. Oh, very provocative question. And we have an empty chair for a business person. Anybody with a business?
Wolfgang.
So as I understand the question, like, because everybody works remotely, but the less rule says we are for collocated a team, does mean there's no less adoptions possible at the moment?
Yeah, we had this discussion with Ellard a few weeks back, and actually we published a video on this. So what about this thing of co-location in LeSS? And we said, well, on the one hand, we all know that a co-located team will most likely outperform a team in the long run which is not co-located. So in this way, we always prefer co-location. But now this whole COVID thing is a little bit like, let's say, a hurdle in the way, and it will not be there forever. Sooner or later, at least I believe, we will find a way around this, and then we can go back to normal. What I think is a much more important thing is that I see many companies who say, we want to now keep this not co-location, and we want to keep this remote work. And I think this is a big danger, in my opinion. I really think that this is something I'm worried about, that if companies now say, hey, let's now go for this, we save money. If you manage costs, your costs go up, so don't do that.
And we see this is already happening. Lots of companies using maybe an excuse to cut costs and get rid of the offices completely. So we will see more and more people working remotely forever now.
So how would you like to?
And then I think that if let's say if some competitor goes back in the office with co-located teams, they will simply outperform the others sooner or later. That's my understanding. You know? So because we have enough of research and science which basically shows that a co-located team is performing better than a non-co-located team.
What if those teams in a research just didn't use the right tools which have emerged just recently, like Miro and Mural? It's more a provocative side on that, because that research, we can say, so somebody might say, oh, that research is out of date with a low bandwidth network, no tools. Of course, people talking face-to-face are more efficient, but you can argue, oh, with these new tools.
Yeah, I think you don't understand. We are human beings and we are social animals, so we are relying on this social network. And we are relying on a lot of things. Like for me, for example, it was really a relief to see my fellow trainers again in person, not on the screen. And the discussions we had within a few hours, we have had for months without this great outcome over Zoom, without getting to the understanding. So this was a complete different level of discussion and outcome what we achieved there.
All right.
Yeah, and for me, the yellow color is like the best color. It gives me so much energy. So I think that if everyone wears yellow, the world would be better. So on the point is like I think if you compare mixed setups, when you have your culture is focused on the office, and you build some team and maybe some members remote and some are not collocated, that's a dysfunctional setup. But it doesn't mean that remote things don't work. There are examples of brilliant companies that are fully remote, and they did it consciously. They built the culture, and it was focused around remote work. So it's not that local teams outperform remote teams. I haven't seen this research, but I think that there are just not many examples of like companies who really focused on that culture. So I'm a big believer that remote teams like work. I know that engineers, I saw so many people discussing, hey, they need to commute 1 hour to work, and like then they start discussing, I will need to commute back, so I would rather leave earlier because I live farther than you guys, and team discuss for an hour how to do some meeting because so I think that it can work. It's a different. You need to look at this from a different perspective. Not imagining a remote team is like the team how we know it, but just being remotely. It should be rethink the way how people work. But it's already, I think, figured out for many people and works very well for them.
Okay. Let's ask an engineer and a new panel member.
So from engineering point of view, the question was, now it's gone. So the question was related to the LeSS rule, right?
Yes.
And,
is it now we are breaking the LeSS rule with the reality?
So I really don't care if I break a LeSS rule. So from engineering point of view, all I'm interested is how do I develop a product? So the point of a LeSS rule is to teach you that this rule is to question what is the consequence of not following it. What am I missing basically? And so not to follow it or follow it. That doesn't really matter. That doesn't matter at all. Obviously, in this current situation right now with the virus, you have to work remotely, so you do. I mean, there are less adoptions working remotely. Do they break the rule? Yes. Who gives a shit?
Okay.
All right.
So let's have the final answer on this question.
Yeah, final comment on that, please.
Okay, and the new member, so the almost final answer.
Bas, you can go.
Do I need to show the sign?
Yeah, so please go ahead. Give the different perspective, please.
Correct. There's no less adoptions ongoing at the moment.
All right.
And as Victor pointed out, that's okay. Because your goal is never adopting less, but your goal is improving your product development. And less hopefully helps with that. But for me, this is very interesting. So having created that rule together with Craig, hey Craig, pay attention. As many know, this is the rule that we've actually probably argued the hardest about. But there were two reasons why we decided to put it there. One, our experience it hasn't changed since, that in average, a co-located team works significantly better than a distributed team. Right? And we're not saying that a distributed team can't work. Right? It is, in average, most co-located teams, an average co-located team works much better than an average distributed team. That was the first reason. The second was that organizations pretend like this is not important. Right? And therefore, by adding it to the rules, purposely knowing that it's a controversial rule, even before COVID, we wanted organizations to talk about that, to ask the question, does co-location matter? Do we believe it matters? And if we do believe it matters, how does that influence the way we structure and set up an organization? Now, for me, this whole COVID experiment, I guess that's a positive phrase of what is happening. This whole COVID experiment is interesting because partly it will acknowledge or not acknowledge Craig and mine experience and value in co-located teams. And therefore, if from this whole COVID, the world proves that distributed teams can work as well as co-located teams, then we will be the first to remove co-location out of the rules. Now, of course, I have a confirmation bias, like everyone, but so far I can tell you in this COVID experiment, the opposite is happening, which is I get a continuous confirmation that I miss seeing people. I miss patting them on their shoulders. I miss standing 3 meters away from my team, secretly looking at them while they don't know that I'm there. I miss all of those physical things that are not there anymore. And maybe they just make me uncomfortable, but my confirmation bias says that that actually matters, and that therefore this entire experiment so far has only so far strengthened my belief that co-location matters and that it ought to be there, even if that means that there's no LeSS options right now.
Okay.
Microphone, please.
Common dysfunction we see is that managers don't understand what's really going on at Gemba, and so they don't understand how to improve things, and that's undesirable. And so in LeSS, one of our suggestions is that managers go to Gemba to really understand. And I'm more convinced as the years pass of the importance of this. And when everyone's distributed, that makes it very hard for people to go to Gemba and to really understand. It's subtle, but terribly important in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So we'll move to the next question and would like the answer from
and before we move to the next question, quick feedback from the audience. Are you getting value? Are you happy? Is it not too slow? Is it not too fast? I think that we could try to time box. What would be your time box proposal?
How many?
How many minutes would you? Seconds? 7 minutes? 5 minutes? It's now half the time box for the panel discussion, so maybe we could speed up a little.
So for the next question, I would like to ask Bastiaan from the business perspective.
What is the biggest barrier for LeSS adoption?
That's a very good one. Speaking for myself, the organization is split over several countries, and there are a lot of different cultures. And that's actually the biggest challenge, the cultures themselves. It's not that the engineers don't want it, it's even that the board has open eyes to it, but when you really are going to say, guys, let's do it, then they're backing out. So for me, it's the culture differences where I need to be at the start, which is at the board.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. So as you know, you need bottom-up support and top-down support, and when that is missing, then you noticed that there's a very high barrier to do any kind of adoption. And what I often see is basically no willingness to change, to do structural change in the organization, or just fake adoption, like the Larman laws said. That's for me the biggest.
And why do you think this barrier is there? Can you elaborate on that?
Sorry?
So why do you think?
Larman law.
Okay. That's self-explanatory, I guess. If you think it is,
if you're not
please move
familiar,
it up.
so Larman law says that organizations are intrinsically optimized to sustain the status quo. And that's what often happens. So management like to do fake kind of transformation, but not really to really do a deep in transformation of the organizational structure.
Okay. Roland, can you remind again which perspective you are on?
I'm a journeyer.
Journeyer.
Yeah. So I've seen a couple of LeSS adoptions, although they're not officially called LeSS adoptions maybe, but they definitely look like LeSS adoptions. I think the barrier for starting is not that complex. Most cases, like when top-level support is there and they really want to go for the hard way and the real way, then they choose LeSS. The problem I see, however, with the biggest barrier is that it all seems like the continuation of the LeSS adoption depends highly on those people staying there. As soon as the manager, top manager that decided that we want to go for LeSS leaves, then, all, like you saw it happening, it just disappears, it vanishes, because somebody else at the top just wants something else. So that makes our work depending on very little things, actually, in the end. And that's sad, isn't it?
Change your influencing strategy.
Yeah, change, yeah. No.
So let's move to the next question then.
All right, great. We just spent just 3 minutes. That was the most efficient answer.
So fine, efficient.
Yes.
So
you can
please
get
take
yourself a bonus.
I think there are many new questions. Please take a moment to vote again so we have some refreshment. So next one is Devil's question. Why is there no X-up in LeSS? And
can somebody explain what it is?
So is the person that wrote this question, can you explain it to the microphone?
Can anybody please from the audience elaborate on X-op terminology? DevOps, SecOps, any kind of ops.
Okay. Is that enough to answer the question?
It is like DevOps, SecOps, QA, development, UX, etc., etc., etc.
Ops.
So this is someone that wants to answer the question.
So maybe a bit more serious answer. And so the reason why is it seems there seems to be assumption in that one needs to introduce new terminology. I actually got this from you, and so one needs to introduce new terminology to bring a change. So staying with a just ordinary normal language is somehow a handicap for bringing the change. So calling a group of people who are delivering end-to-end a team is somehow problematic. We want to keep things simple, and a part of that is also understanding and focusing on the real thing instead of a fancy terminology. And so it creates a distraction, basically, this terminology. That's why there's no need to do that, and it creates a distraction. So it's actually negative to use this kind of terminology.
Can you also answer it from the engineering perspective, or is that the same answer? It's not? Think about it.
Maybe I can say something from engineering perspective. So I think, from my perspective,
switch chairs.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Be careful with the chairs not falling off this stage, please.
So from my perspective, there is not such thing as DevOps. So I think the whole movement was to bring closer the operation with the development, and to automate the whole operation into development. And by that, there is like all the things like we're looking for a DevOps engineer or something like that. It's more like an oxymoron. So I mean, it's there. That is a skill actually that we want people to learn how to automate maintenance and not do any kind of changes in production, but rather through code and through automated testing and so on.
Anyone else that wants to answer the question? No? So I want to encourage, there are 2 empty chairs, so please.
And maybe there's a different
wild card even.
Maybe there's a different point of view on that. Maybe there's a different point of view on that question. Already gave. Maybe there's another different point of view on this question.
No, you're on a different point of view chair, that's why he is asking you for even more different.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question then.
We are getting more and more efficient with every question. It was just 2 minutes. You guys are...
Facilitator needs to be efficient too. Next question, please.
Yes.
What do you know?
Can you self-serve yourself the questions now? Okay. When do you know you reached the point to call it LS adoption?
Please put some new question.
When do you know you reached the point to call it LS adoption?
I actually never wondered that myself. I never wondered that question, so I wondered the importance of that.
Exactly. I think we discussed it at some point. Is when is it beneficial actually, or maybe even not beneficial to call it a LS adoption? So in some cases, I think it might, but it can be even harmful in some situation because people, like, again, we want to people to own the change and own the way they're working, and not do it because Les said you have to do it that way. So that's super important to us, and that's something that it can. That's why I think sometimes it can be even harmful, because then people are just saying, yeah, we're doing that because Les says to do that, and we want people to do it because they're convinced that there are some principle behind it, and they want to live this principle.
Right. And maybe to confirm what you are saying, we've done a case study online, a conference on LESS in July, and from 10 cases that were presented, I think in 9 cases people said we never called it LS adoption while we were doing this LS adoption. Only post-mortem, when we were describing that, then we called it LS adoption. So that's the majority kind of situation, right?
So the different perspective.
It is called a LESS adoption whenever you fulfill every single rule on the LESS rules.
Very good.
Okay.
Can you say that?
Wait, may I
Sure.
say more?
Yeah, sure.
Or do you want to time box me away?
Now just finish your question.
Okay. But as earlier question, it doesn't really matter whether you call it a less adoption, because that's not the point of building a product. I shared with the trainers on Tuesday that one of the things that I now like to say is that in LeSS, we always hold on to perfection and we always accept reality. We hold that, if you wish, contradiction in our mind. And therefore, a LeSS adoption is truly an adoption where you follow all of the LeSS rules, and also where you're not following them yet, but that is your, for the moment, where you're working towards. So even if you follow not a single LeSS rule at the moment, and you've agreed that LeSS is a guideline for your improvement, then at that point I would already say you're in a LeSS adoption. You just have a very long way to go still.
So if you have an opinion, please take the chair. If you have a new question, you can.
Yeah, it's a question about this topic, about LeSS adoption. So can we say that maybe a starting path for the LeSS adoption could be break down the products and services into value streams? The products and services that your company built into value streams, for example?
Well, the phrase value stream is not one that we use within LeSS.
Okay. But the idea itself, I was thinking about the idea of understanding what the value that it's actually bringing for that specific customer. When we gather together different products, for example. So, for example, we're a bank and we have different products. And now we are trying to segment a little bit more based on the value that it actually brings for the customer. Maybe there's no right or wrong as well. It's just
no, it's not right and wrong. It's it's both right and wrong, which is what makes it so hard. Yes, when you have a LeSS adoption, one of the first things you'll do is think about the value delivering towards your customer. But then you do not want to structure your organization like that. Right? Unless we have feature teams, and a feature team is a team that picks up features, not a team that is named after a specific set of features and owns those kind of features. Right? Similarly, we have a requirements area, which is multiple teams working around a set of features. But then in the LeSS rules, it explicitly recommends to not make that a part of your formal organization. And the reason for those is that as soon as you name a team the invoicing team, you've lost kind of the exercise that Craig did in the morning. It makes it harder to change that over time. So therefore, we'd like teams to be simply called teams and never assign a specific feature group to that. Although we'd like the teams to have the ability to choose to pick up a specific feature group without them being that specific feature group team. And similar for requirements areas, when you put them in your organization, it has its advantages, but the effect will be that your requirements area becomes much more static than it ought to be in LeSS, because it ought to be something that you can relatively easy change. And therefore, if you have an organization with multiple development departments, then our favorite name for the development departments is Development Department 1 and Development Department 2, etc. You can guess the other ones. So that we have completely removed both the architecture from the development department, the architecture from the organization, but also the customer-centric perspective from the organizational structure. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't start with talking about what value do we deliver to whatever customers, because they lead to your product backlog and potentially your requirements areas, etc. Thank you.
So
Just
an engineering perspective, and that's the final one for this question.
There's one more thing to value stream map. When I noticed that happening, it's not a bad exercise. It's actually a good exercise which leads to better understanding how do we deliver value to the customer. But what I often see is then this urge to optimize that, which is also a good thing. But as you remember, LeSS doesn't optimize for the cycle times, but actually for adaptability and customer value. So that's what's the LeSS system optimizing goal, and that's what we want to focus on. And if we can, and if that means also to make the cycle time shorter, then we wanted to do that. But the main focus, the system optimizing goal of LeSS, is adaptability and customer value.
Okay. So
right.
Let's
Thanks.
move to
Just
the next question.
as a reminder, you can put your questions. You can vote for them. You can also join the empty chairs.
Because there are still 75% of panel members.
And we have time for
average,
about 2 or
trainers.
3 more questions. And if you have a very burning question, you can still use the microphone and hack the system and just shoot it. I removed the wrong one.
No, you moved the wrong one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I was waiting.
Can you remember which?
That next question was very interesting, which is gone
yeah,
now.
it was.
I fucked up. I'm sorry. Can we remember how it was?
I think I remember. It was about we as a consultants, agile coaches. How do you prevent to be cargo cult, and how to
how can we bring more value to the customers?
bring
from a
value to the
coaching
customers? Yeah,
perspective?
yeah. So
the question was, what do we need to change in our behavior as consultants to bring more value to our customers instead of introduce the perception of less cargo cult coaches?
So I want to start with the actual customer business for this.
So what was the last part of the question? I didn't get it.
And reduce the perception of less cargo cult coaches.
Is it clear to you?
Well, from the perspective of the business, I would say if it is a business like ours, we're starting from scratch. So the experience we had before with, for example, the Scrum trainers, I think anything in the beginning will help. So for me, there's no specific improvements that I'm seeking for beyond getting started, actually.
There are 2 aspects. The first one is it depends very much on a type of a cargo cult, and the first one is for me is the humble inquiry. There's a book, multiple books actually from the same writer. I forgot the name of the writer. Edgar Schein. So very, very useful to read, and it gives you a very nice explanation and understanding of how important it is to have a curiosity, and that your job is not, especially when you go to the customer, quite often the whole setting invites you to become a kind of a cargo cult. So it starts with we need a solution to the problem, blah, 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 and so you are here to provide a solution and we pay you a lot. And so the worst thing one can do is then try to give a solution. And instead, being just curious is really important, and understanding what is going on. And this curiosity goes very far to the Gemba. So a big suggestion is go to the team, sit with the team, spend time co-developing, fixing bugs, whatever, and experience how product development really works. And that brings a lot of insight. So this feels obviously uncomfortable because you might be paid quite a lot per day for doing that. You're actually learning, teaching yourself, but still extremely important to do that. Yeah. Second one is never do half advice. And then what I mean is that you kind of say, yeah, you should be having people educated, for example, or you should be doing voluntarism when you're creating a feature teams, a self-design team workshop, and then a customer says, yeah, but it's a bit difficult. Can you still do it? We're not going to do it entirely, as you say. And then they say, okay, if we cannot do it differently, we're going to do it as you want. But you forget to explain the consequence of that. And make it in crystal clear what exactly actually is going to happen. You don't push them, you don't demand something to happen, but you want to teach them the consequence of doing certain things. And I've noticed quite often the consequence is not made very clear. And then when things go wrong, then the blame game starts to exist. Yeah.
So the engineering perspective?
There's 3 empty seats here. Please come.
So let's do a final question, because people want to.
We have 9 minutes, so it might not be the final. It might be just final.
So we talked about reading the room before, and I see a lot of people on their phones. So
you guys
I
are little.
propose to
You guys are
do
little
the final question.
Down energy. Could you show some appreciation for people in the panel? Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Where LeSS will be in 5 years from now?
Can I explain the question? Because I wrote it and I didn't draw.
This is the wild card, so he can.
He can do anything he wants. I'm sorry. That's the rule of the game. You can also fight for a microphone if you want.
Can I try and answer first and then let you explain the question? Then maybe we'll get multiple questions answered. Just to be clear, everyone, engineering, not different perspective. So I will rephrase the question to what will be the most interesting LeSS adoptions in 5 years? And I don't know if that was the original meaning of the question, but that sounds like an interesting question. You know, what better is it to be in a panel and make up the questions and interpret them the way you want them to be? The engineer is always right. So earlier this year still, actually, when I was allowed to travel still, I visited GrooveX, one of the companies in Japan, and they're making lovable robots. It's a robotic startup, and they're really wonderful. I want to get one immediately, but unfortunately they're successful, and they're very hard to get now outside of Japan. Now, the story I heard is the founder of the company. He doesn't like structure and hierarchy, and he wanted to have a really flat organization. And but it's robotics, so it's hardware, software, and it's all of the things together. Doing a LeSS adoption, but so far not so much in the hardware teams. But one of my favorite of the comments there is that the owner of the company, the founder of the company, a robotics expert, is refusing to accept that hardware has physical limitations, and he wants to change his mind all the time. Even when the hardware people says it costs a lot of money to change it, he says, I want it anyway, and he changes his mind. And therefore they're forced to constantly, on hardware development, also respond to change and try to figure out how to cope with that. And for me, that's the interesting areas in the future in LeSS, where we integrate hardware development in teams, figure out how to get that to work, how to get that to change, and get software developers. Because one of the things they did in GrooveX is some of the software developers were annoyed that the hardware was hard to change, and therefore they changed the team to the hardware team to learn more about hardware development, to try to changed the mindset of the hardware developer. So they started creating much more cross-functionality in people and in teams. And of course, I'm in the engineering perspective, but that's what I'd like to see also more in the next 5 years.
Magnus.
Change the question. I think, where will the LeSS community be in 5 years? And if I was to wish, I would like it to be widely recognized as the best place to go, regardless of where you are, to be able to learn and accelerate learning together in a friendly community where you feel welcome, whether you're a junior or whether you're a senior or wherever you are. This is the place to meet. Even more so today. No bullshit place. Hard science.
Yeah, so the different perspective. So maybe would look like that highly specialized AI models decide to go more generalized, and they're being coached by AI LeSS coach, and the whole LeSS adoption takes 250 milliseconds.
Okay, so let's move to the final question. And let's have the new LeSS junior to answer it first. So what are successful strategies to go to the Gemba of production with remote teams? So Cesario, can you start answering that?
What are the successful strategies to go to Gemba of production with remote teams? So maybe people are asking for some advice as how to keep going to Gemba these days when you don't actually see the Gemba because it's...
Can you give the microphone to
Cesario,
the new panel member?
Cesario.
Junior.
Or you can sit one step to the right if you prefer.
So, what are successful strategies to go to the Gemba? So, as a junior, I'm at the Gemba every day. So, I think that a successful strategy would be to be able to understand what's going on with the teams and to notice. I'm particularly interested in recurring events that happen, that keep coming back. And with remote teams, the strategy that I only see, apart from flying, which is not possible at the moment, is to have some kind of tooling, like, I don't know, the tooling you already are familiar with. And use that to, as best as possible, observe dynamics when the teams are collaborating in their Zoom kind of meetings, to get that understanding that you would easier get from being there, but you can't. Paying extra attention, paying extra care to the moments when the teams actually interact with each other, but now they're interacting online. That would be my approach.
So, Bas, can I ask you to keep your answer short? To keep your answer short, so I want to hear the business perspective.
You want to hear from the other boss?
After you. So,
okay. This is easy because you just go and look in the code in your repository. All of that is available if you're remote still, and you can see a lot of things from looking at the code. Like when I worked with Jacek actually in Nokia, we would, before we would work with the team, before we would physically go to the team, we would observe the code and the code base. We actually wrote some tools. They're open source and unmaintained because we didn't have enough time to do that. But we wrote some tools that would extract from your code base the amount of commits over time per team, the average time per commit, and lots of things like that. And before we even went to the teams, and this was when they were co-located, before we even went to the teams, we could say which teams were using what practices, which teams were working together, which teams had specialization. One of the favorite was making this, what was the tool called? Gorsh. Gorsh was a graphical representation of your code over time. So if one person kept working always in the same place, you would see a picture of a picture of that person always hanging on the same place. And if the team was coordinating and working over the entire code base, you saw all the people just going around on the screen, working everywhere. So even with remote teams, or especially with remote teams, use your code and code repository for lots and lots of information about what's going on in Gemba.
Thank you. So let's have the final answer from the business perspective of this panel.
I think for me, especially in these days, I like to mix teams a lot, and on regular basis. So usually every quarter, teams start to mix. Performance will go down.
What do you mean by mix?
Just change teams, like we saw earlier today. Okay. The benefit, apart from that you get a little bit of downfall for a few weeks, because people are learning new things, is that all teams individually become much, much stronger. The company that I work for does both products and services, which makes it also difficult to mix this, because some people are not suited initially for services, which is kind of consulting. But it's very interesting learning curve to get a true engineer who can hardly speak normal, actually go to a customer and act like what you would expect from a consultant. So it's very scary to start doing that, actually. But once you're over there, it's very fun. With COVID-19, it's way more difficult to do. Especially engineers like to hide behind their screens. I haven't got any good tips how to get them out of there. So let's hope for a vaccine.
Okay, so that's actually a really great end to.
I thought maybe some of you would want to comment on team changing, if you want to, or on team changing and mixing, if you want to, as a final comment.
No, I was just imagining programmers behind their screen.
What's so strange about that?
Well, I guess they're hiding in front of their screen. Behind their screen, they can do a lot of work.
Yeah, if you look at it like that, you're completely right, boss.
So I have a applause for all panel members that joined this discussion. Thank you.